So our first speaker is Supervisor Gioia, who's both Supervisor of Contra Costa County, a member of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and also a member of the Air Resources Board representing local government.
Let me first start by thanking the League for holding this event. This is really important, and all of you play an important role in helping shape public opinion and educate the public on the issue of climate change. I think the only way we are going to meet our 2050 goals on reducing greenhouse gas emissions is going to be a continued change in public opinion on this issue, and you are going to play an important role in that. And I want to especially thank the League of Women Voters in my area, West Contra Costa County. They hold their regular meetings often at my office, so I know how hard they work, and I know a few of you are here, so I know how important it is to come together. And I get a chance to work on climate change issues on three levels: the state level, on the Air Resources Board, the regional level with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and then the county level on our Board of Supervisors. And let me start by saying that it is good to see that there's continued to be a shift in public opinion. There was a poll that was just released, and it highlights the role of education in your role. And it just came out, and it was that 74% of Americans believe the federal government should be doing a substantial amount to combat climate change. That's great news. 2/3 of Americans have said that they're more likely to vote for candidates who campaign on fighting climate change. And that's, get this, half of Republicans feel that. So that's important, that's going up. And here's also, I think, an important fact. The number of Americans who believe climate change is caused in some way by human activity is growing. In 2011, it was at 72%. In the new poll, it was at 81%. So that's good news. But we've got a long ways to go to meet the 2050 goal. You all know AB 32 set a goal for 2020 that we would reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels. The good news is that we're going to achieve that target. In fact, there was a study just released, funded by the Air Board, done by a scientist at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, that said, yes, confirmed that we're going to meet that goal. And in fact, with the policies currently in place and others being proposed, that we would probably by 2030 get to, on the way toward somewhere between 30 and 40% below 1990 levels, but that we would fall far short of the 80% goal by 2050. And it's important to note that 80% goal by 2050 is an executive order. The legislation that established the 2020 goal is a hard, fast rule of the law. The legislature is going to be considering moving towards setting a midterm goal. The science tells us we need to stabilize climate warming 2%, 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit by 2050. That's why we need the 80% below 1990 levels. All of you are going to be very important part of getting the legislature to pass a law to be signed by the governor, which sets a midterm goal of 2030 and a 2050 goal in legislation, because that goal now is an executive order. So we need even more strength in the law to get there. So how are we getting to 2020? We hear a lot about cap and trade. Cap and trade really is only a smaller part of how we get to the 2020 goal. So just to give a little perspective, so cap and trade gets us about a little under 20% of the way to the 2020 goal. Something called the low carbon fuel standard, which is to lower the carbon intensity of our fuels, gets us about 15% of the way. You're going to hear more about the sustainable community strategy. Toward 2020, that only gets us about under 5%. It'll be more significant for our 2030 or 2050 goal. So clean cars, renewable energy, all of those are an important part of getting us to the 2020 goal. The governor, in his inaugural address, really laid out some of the big picture strategies that are needed to get us to 2050. Increasing the amount of renewable energy by 2030 to 50%, doubling the energy efficiency of existing buildings. Also by 2030, reducing petroleum use in cars and trucks by 50%. These are all going to be essential to get to 2050 goals. And also, he talked about reducing short-lived climate pollutants like black carbon, which you heard a little bit about. So, what is the Air Resources Board doing? So, the Air Resources Board is going to be developing some recommendations for a 2030 midterm goal, which hopefully will get enacted in legislation to have a stronger force of law. So that's sort of our task right now. And the governor's major points are going to be, there's going to be a specific strategy on how to implement those points. You know, 35 years away seems like a long time. It really isn't. So there's a lot to be done, but let me sort of put out some optimism to show that we can go a long ways in 35 years. It was about 35 years ago that catalytic converters came on the market and started appearing in cars. Over the last 35 years, cars are now 99% cleaner than they were when catalytic converters were first installed. So I think that gives us sort of a perspective that things can happen in 35 years. In fact, the sort of research shows that most of the strategies that we can use to get to a 2050 goal are out there, mostly, not all, in commercially available technology today. It's going to take political will. It's going to take a change in policy. It's going to take changes in our own behavior and how we live, how we grow, how we drive. So all of that. But the good news is that it can be done with mostly the commercially available technology that's out there today. It is important, I think, to note that probably the most important focus is going to be on the transportation and energy sectors, because it is those two sectors that contribute about 60% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, I drove here today in an electric vehicle, although there was no charging station here. However, let me say, when the new regional government building is built in San Francisco, it's going to have electric vehicle charging stations. A perfect example how the Bay Area is going to be building even more infrastructure for to support electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell as well. And every time I know I see Chris Peoples here from AC Transit, I always want to acknowledge, because I think, you know, AC Transit has the largest fleet of hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles in the country, and they have a hydrogen fuel cell charging station in Emeryville, which I used when I was sort of test driving a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. So we are well ahead of the country here in California, and as our keynote speaker said, I think folks are looking to what we're doing in California, and hopefully looking at the policies that we are adopting on a federal level. The problem is that if you look at the makeup of Congress, it's hard to see a federal, overall federal strategy being enacted anytime soon, which is exactly why your work and the work of organizations, advocates across this country are so important. It's going to take changing public opinion to support the policies at the federal level. I think not unlike what's happened in this country about people's thinking on same-sex marriage. And that public opinion shift occurred pretty quickly. We're going to need that public opinion shift to occur pretty quickly on climate change if we're going to be effective, again, at initiating policies that get us to the 2050 goal. There were a lot of really good questions, and I hope you ask them of our panel, because I know the three of us are going to be able to answer some of those questions as well. And I'm very impressed by the level of knowledge that I've heard. And again, this is a partnership on how we get to 2050. Let me just say, Oregon and Washington are actually the other two states that are more aggressive than others at climate change policies. And the governor of the state of Washington, Jay Inslee, has been looking at an aggressive climate change program there. And what we're beginning to see is the oil industry in those states trying to stop the enactment of climate change laws. We've been successful here in California, and the cap and trade program that exists in California is now linked to Quebec. The hope is that as other states like Oregon and Washington go down this road and enact a cap and trade program with statewide caps on carbon, that we could join markets together and be that much more effective at reducing greenhouse gas emissions and slowing climate change. So again, look forward to the good questions you have, and you've got a great panel. All these folks it's a partnership effort here in the Bay Area, and I am really honored to be working alongside many of you and folks here on this panel who are really doing really playing a large role in making us successful. Thanks.
And our next speaker will be Ken Kirkey, the Planning Director of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for coming to the Metro Center. And I really do appreciate the work that the League does. It's genuinely nice to see so many people in this room in such a civil conversation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, just a little bit about Plan Bay Area, the Bay Area's Regional Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy that was adopted in 2013, and a little bit more about some of the things we're doing to implement the plan that tie into greenhouse gas reductions. This slide, which is unfortunately fairly hard to read, this is about one aspect of the plan that didn't actually get so much attention, but from my perspective was probably one of the best aspects of the plan. It was a project performance assessment we did for transportation projects that were submitted for the RTP. It's a very different take than we had done in the past. It was a very deliberate attempt to connect regional transportation planning with the requirements of SB 375 and to look at some broader regional goals. So what we did was come up with goals that were adopted by the policymakers at MTC and ABAG related to the economy, the environment, equity, as well as a cost-benefit analysis for each of the projects. We put those through this assessment, and we came up with a project list that was really quite different than the project lists in terms of priorities and ranking than we had ever seen before in the Regional Transportation Plan. This, again, I'm sorry that it's hard to read, but I'll focus on the project that is in the upper right of this slide. It's called BART Metro. It's the highest performing project in the plan. BART Metro is essentially providing more capacity to the core of the system. Any of you who are on the trains at commute times, particularly going in and out of San Francisco during the week, know that we're packed like sardines these days. And to address that in the near term, as well as the longer term, requires a lot of investment. Requires things like a train control system being replaced, additional cars, more capacity in the downtown stations. It also ties very closely to the growth in the plan. So there's a lot of job and housing growth in the plan in the core of San Francisco and downtown Oakland, around the BART stations, throughout the network, and this investment ties back to that growth pattern. So it's an example of something we did different, and I think it's better than what we've done in the past, and it does tie to greenhouse gas emissions. Another program that we started just prior to the plan kickoff is something called the One Bay Area Grant Program. MTC had a whole series of programs in the past, a bike and ped program, a larger local streets and roads program. They were separate silos of money that went out to various entities. This program wrapped them into one, essentially a block grant that goes out to the counties, the congestion management agencies, the transportation agencies for the counties. And it's based upon a formula that combines housing production, the housing communities in those counties have to plan for through the very popular regional housing need allocation process. It also required that in our 5 more urban counties that 70% of the funding needed to be invested in what are called priority development areas. Those are transit-served infill areas that are nominated by local jurisdictions. There was another set of requirements that any jurisdiction receiving any of these funds, whether or not it would be spent in a priority development area or not, had to have a certified housing element. Many of you are probably aware that in the Bay Area, although housing elements are a requirement as part of the general plan process, they're supposed to be updated every several years. We've had a number of jurisdictions in the past in the Bay Area just didn't feel like doing that. It turns out that this seems to have had an effect because for the first time since RENA was started, every jurisdiction in the Bay Area currently has a certified housing element. And I guess we'd like to think there's a connection. There's also complete street requirements. And I think part of the reason we were able to move this forward, because it is fairly groundbreaking compared to what happens in much of the country, was that there was still flexibility at the local level, and I think it's working pretty well. This is the distribution formula that I mentioned. You can see that the larger, more urban counties taking on more growth get more of the money. One of the programs we've had for some time that doesn't get so much attention, but we think it's really important, is the Priority Development Area Planning Program. It's essentially a neighborhood planning program. We make money available to local communities to plan neighborhoods. We are in one of those areas right now, the Lake Merritt Station area. Plan was recently adopted. There's been a couple year-long process working with people in this neighborhood about what do they want this neighborhood to be over time. How can it take on more growth and still be a place that benefits the folks who've lived here for a long time. And over 60,000 homes have been planned through this process. So it's a critical part of implementing focused growth here in the Bay Area. After our policymakers endured a fairly long discussion the night of the adoption of the plan, to their credit, I think they got down to work on one of the key issues related to the plan, and it does get back to what I touched on earlier, and that's transit capacity. There's enough money in the plan to maintain the current levels of service. There was not enough money in the plan to really expand capacity, expand service going forward. And given the growth in the plan and that we project greater transit ridership, it was seen as something that needed to be dealt with. One of the things we've embarked on right now in partnership with AC Transit, BART, San Francisco Muni essentially, and the ferries, as well as Caltrain, which Caltrain needs to be added to the slide, is looking at the core of the region. It sort of builds on the BART Metro idea I talked about, and looking near term, what are some near term solutions, and really looking at these transit operators as if we were actually a system. How can they work together? How can the system work together to provide more capacity? In the midterm, what are some additional investments that can be made for more capacity? And then in the long term, when all that is done, given the level of growth that we expect, say at 2040, 2030, somewhere along the line, when might we need to consider things like a second Transbay tube for BART, which is getting a lot of mention in the press right now, but it's actually probably the furthest out of all the things we'll be looking at. The South Bay is also taking on a lot of growth in the plan, particularly around San Jose. South Bay is in a very different place at this point in time in terms of its land use pattern, it's urbanizing. BART is being extended to San Jose, Caltrain's being electrified, but it's still a much more suburban region. And as these systems get put into place, one of the things we want to do is ensure that people use the systems. So working with BTA, we're developing a series of solutions that we hope will be helpful for the first and last mile connections, which in the South Bay are huge. It's the the region that invented the office park, and getting people from the office park to the station and the reverse is really important. So this study will look at that, and we hope that there'll be some tools that can be used across the region that come out of it. Building on work that's happened in the city of San Francisco as well as with BART, we're doing a study looking at the underutilized public lands near the transit stations and along the corridors, not just transit-owned lands, but just public lands that are not being well utilized. Might they be places where additional mixed income development could happen? Is there a way to incentivize affordable housing given the lack of funding at the state level for affordable housing? I heard a question earlier on for the lead speaker on parking. we're doing a study, a project on parking at this point in time, working with a number of communities in the region. This is a pricing strategy that, in my experience, tends to make people yawn very quickly. Parking is not that exciting until you can't find a spot and you're angry. But nonetheless, we know that in some communities where they've implemented parking policies, they've worked quite well. Berkeley actually has been very successful in terms of setting up parking strategies for downtown Berkeley that have lessened the amount of driving people need to do. They've removed some of the burden on developers to provide parking because of shared parking, and we hope this project will be helpful in that regard. I'm going to very quickly, because I have a minute, go through the next few slides. One is related to a partnership with the Air Quality Management District. A commuter benefits ordinance was enacted this past year. It requires employers of more than 50 employees to provide a commuter benefit to their employees. It's really the first in the nation like this, and we hope it'll have a big impact. There's a whole series of innovative grants that we've provided for climate initiative programs, from safe routes to school to clean vehicles. John was talking about the EV charger network. We're working with the Air District to implement that. We're putting money into van pools that serve communities of concern, and we recognize that not everybody in the region works for Google, and that car sharing is something that should be expanded, and so we've just recently given grants to expand car sharing, for example, to the Coliseum station area here in Oakland, to the Fruitvale station area, to a number of other communities of concern. And with that, I'll say thank you.
Our final speaker on this panel is Stuart Cohen, the Executive Director of Transport.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you for having me. It's great to see some of the folks we've worked with over the years. And it was about 18 years ago that I founded Transform, and really it was called back then the Bay Area Transportation and Land Use Coalition, and League of Women Voters of the Bay Area became a member. And our main intent was to hassle and watchdog MTC. And when we first came to them, they didn't quite have this vision. They didn't have a vision of how do you make smart growth. In fact, when we spoke with them and said, you need to do a smart growth scenario and integrate land use and transportation better, they said, actually, they do land use downstairs at ABAD, we do transportation. To see how far the region has come in 18 years is phenomenal, and it's in large part because we all got together, and the League has done a great job too in their advocacy of telling leaders, no, we have to think about what's happening in 25 years and not just accept the status quo. And I'd say right now, we're doing a lot of work around the country now, and MTC is truly, I think, the regional transportation agency in the lead of innovation. So I'd say right now it's become much more of a partnership, which, as I was telling Ken earlier, is actually much more boring for me as an advocate. But anyway, we have to do it, so we're going to keep doing it. Anyway, so the three things I'm going to try to quickly cover today. One is the greenhouse gas and location kind of evidence, why growing smarter makes a difference, why it's so critical we keep income diversity, making sure that people with low and moderate incomes are able to continue living near transit, even as it becomes so desirable and expensive. And then finally, a project that we're working on how can we take this connection that we've made at this regional scale with all of this regional planning and unleash market forces, so as we're building new buildings, we're getting what Andy Natov talked about, we're getting new transportation options. We don't have the money in our governmental institutions to provide the amount of transit service, to provide the new options we need. We need to unleash innovation in the market sector. With that, I'm going to also point to the South Bay, but this is, how we've developed land use, and this is one of the reasons that the South Bay Light Rail is so incredibly inefficient, and because it makes stops right near here and nobody uses it. So we did a study with the Center for Neighborhood Technology looking at the costs of where you live and how much you spend on transportation. map's a little hard to see, but the basic is that in the 20% of areas that have the best transit service in the Bay Area, people are spending $5,450 less on average than the other 80% as a whole, and a lot less than the folks living with the least transit access, even more than that. And when you look at the climate map, those same 20% with the best transit access, and that's areas like Rock Ridge, even Walnut Creek downtown, and certainly San Francisco, they're emitting on average 42% less. So these same places that are saving money are having the low emissions. And to tell you how the market is demanding this, just like Andy said about her kids, I just saw a Berkeley side article. I live in Berkeley, and they analyzed 10 neighborhoods and the price increases for sale prices of homes over the last year. 18% on average increase. My neighborhood, North Berkeley, about 18%, very walkable. The most transit-oriented and walkable, North Berkeley, BART station area, both downtown and North Berkeley nearby, had a 27% growth. And who wants to guess what the change was in the hills of Berkeley? Some of you probably live there. 0. It went down by 8%. Nobody is looking, especially who's coming in with kids, to try to go somewhere where you're going to drive for every trip. It's just the way the market is going. And so what that means is we are both, finally have these tailwinds at our back with both regional policies as well as market demand. And it's exactly where we hoped many years ago that we would be. And it's brought up this problem that we hadn't quite confronted, 18 years ago when we were starting all this, which is who can afford $1 million home, a little cottage near North Berkeley Park? So anyway, we did a study recently. We've been fighting for 2 years to get affordable homes near transit as part of the cap and trade investments, and lead a coalition called Sustainable Communities for All that was fighting for it. But we didn't have the evidence we needed, and so we commissioned the same group, Center for Neighborhood Technology, to do a study that would look at this $6 million survey Caltrans had just done, but had not analyzed by income. And they had access to the study, a kind of access the public doesn't have to play with it. And what we found is, and we told the state, that this is the evidence you need. If you break down California by income and by proximity to transit, you'll see that the extremely low income on the left going to higher income on the right drive about half as much. So these are the 4 income thresholds for affordable housing: extremely low to moderate, and then higher on the right. Drive about half as much. And so if we're investing in affordable homes, yes, one of these individuals, and say the 15,000 units, you might not drive less, maybe they didn't have a car before. But if you're aggregating it up, you're going to get a massive reduction in driving, because we're able to allow people to continue to live or to move to transit, even if they're low income. This is also the car ownership rate, which also, as you can see, as you get lower and lower income, not surprisingly, you're owning about half the vehicles on average if you're going to be in affordable homes as compared to market rate. So we put it on a study. I have executive summaries of some of the stuff I'm talking about today. I have one-pagers that'll be out on the left. And this report turned out to be pivotal in getting affordable homes, which is now 10% of the cap and trade investment. But anyway, so as we're looking, wow, that slide doesn't want to go up. Yeah, nobody wants traffic. The traffic slide doesn't even want to be up. So as we're looking to do this infill, we're running up against something that I know a lot of you are actually working on. I just bumped into somebody talking from Palo Alto talking about this, which is that as traffic has gotten bad, especially in downtowns and especially as we're starting to grow, people are now rejecting infill. This whole idea that this is going to work at a regional scale depends on approvals at the site level and plans at the site level. And so because of the traffic, it's the #1 reason that we are getting no more development at that local level. I think this is the worst of it, which is a senior, affordable housing near downtown where everybody's going to walk, was rejected in Palo Alto largely, again, over traffic concerns. And so we got funded by MTC to do a study of, well, maybe we don't need as much parking, maybe we don't have as much driving in these areas near transit. And so we did a study that if you go to our green trip, if you just Google green trip, you could see, where we studied 68 affordable housing sites and found that a third of the spaces are empty. Out of the 9,000, 3,000 of the spaces were empty because the cities make folks build too much. And so if that's podium parking, that's about $50,000 per space and floors that could have gone towards more homes or green space. And altogether, it was $140 million just in those 68 developments that we studied of wasted parking space. And so we have a project called Green Trip that is trying to do what I said before, unleash the market to stop wasting their money on this and instead to provide residents with transportation choices. So we work with developers. So this is Garden Village, just broke ground this week. It's right now a one-story office building with a large parking lot. And it's in South Berkeley. It was proposed with be about 77 units for over 200 people, and they were required to build significant parking underneath. It was going to make it infeasible. So we worked with them to come up with $1.3 million worth of trip reduction strategies, like free transit passes and free car share on site for the membership, a whole array of trip reduction strategies. I don't have time to get into some of the great details, but I have a fact sheet on it. And what happened was, the city said, you can get rid of the parking, because we realize now that if everybody can share 6 vehicles, you don't have to build this $2.5 million lot. And the opposition to it melted away too, because the community realized, oh, there are not going to be all these extra cars, cramming up our neighborhood. And it got unanimous approval. It was about to be defeated, and it just went under construction. And now they're using this kind of green trip as a way, I'll be one more minute, as a way to market their development as different, as a very low transportation cost place to come. You get your free transit passes, you get your bike lockers, you get your bike fix-it station, and that's going to be the way of the future. So really quickly, we're just looking to take this to scale now by bringing this information, instead of the 2 months we do for analysis that has to happen for this, we're looking to allow developers and the community to kind of get this information at their fingertips, see what happens as you add car share, see what happens as you do these strategies, as you add affordable housing, and be able to see how much less driving will happen, how many less GHGs, and how much savings you can get by eliminating a certain amount of parking. So again, I have a fact sheet on this, and this is what we want to see in the future. We want to see yes, 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 like we had at Garden Village. We want to see this development moving forward, and when people get into it, we want them to have these kind of choices, and like the Lopez family, be saving $3,200 a year on transit so that they don't have to own a vehicle, which because of those passes, they don't. So thank you very much, and we love working with the League and look forward to more.
First question to Ken Kirkey. Bus right-of-ways are less expensive than rail. To what extent is MTC funding these rights-of-way?
So I mentioned BART Metro, but if you could read that slide, which I realize you probably could not, a number of the other highest performing projects were bus rapid transit projects. So bus is very much part of the solution. I mean, I think one of the interesting aspects of the core capacity transit study that we're doing in partnership with the different transit operators is how much things can change over a relatively short period of time. It wasn't that long ago we were in the recession. Transit funding was being cut. Ridership was down. And let's just say AC Transit and BART were kind of working toward drawing some of the same riders. Now BART and AC Transit are saying, let's work together because our buses are getting full, the trains are full, and how do we get people moving around? And And so I think we can look at it much more as a system, and buses will have a huge part to play in the transit future for the region based upon the very premise of the question. We have a couple big transit expansions that are still going to happen, principally BART to San Jose, but for the most part, buses are going to be a big part of the solution because it's something we can afford.
Thanks. Next question is addressed to Supervisor Gioia regarding hydrogen vehicles. My understanding is that the source of hydrogen requires clean, desalinated water. Is that economically or environmentally feasible?
Let me first start by saying I think what's important to look at all of these is the life cycle of energy production from the start to the end. And clearly, hydrogen that's produced in a cleaner way has lower carbon emissions than hydrogen that's produced in a less clean way. And so, as the governor stated, his goal of how we move the state toward more renewable fuel, more renewable energy, the goal is the renewable energy that we have over time reduces carbon emissions. And so for hydrogen fuel cell, the life cycle analysis shows that overall we get less carbon emissions. There was a good question earlier about battery technology. Again, applying the same theory, you look at the life cycle, cost and benefits of all of this. For example, if you're driving an electric vehicle in a state that produces electricity predominantly through coal, it's actually cleaner to drive a hybrid or even some gasoline that's produced with lower carbon emissions. So that is why it is really important to move us toward renewable energy so that the electricity we produce, like in California we have, our electricity is more produced through natural gas and hydroelectric, so it's cleaner. So electric vehicle, the life cycle carbon emissions in an electric vehicle in California are lower than an electric vehicle that you drive in a state with coal-produced electricity. So that's why it's important to link this to federal policy. But here in California, the life cycle analysis shows that battery electric vehicles, hydrogen fuel cell are going to be helpful. And as the technology gets better in the development of both of them, it will even get better. There's always cost associated with every alternative, but that's why you have to look at the cost and the benefits of all of it.
Thanks. Now, the next question goes back to Plan Bay area, and I guess Stuart or Cohen can deal with this. Says, although the dozen or so people here today from Marin seem to accept Plan Bay area, why do you suppose so many people in Marin oppose Plan Bay area so vociferously?
And I'll say something after you, because I was on ABAG when we voted for it and heard from a lot of those folks, even though I'm in Contra Costa.
Right, okay.
This is a fun question. I think one of the things that's interesting about the plan is if you look at the growth pattern that is in the plan and you look at where it is directed, there are 16 cities actually, it's a strange number, but 16 cities, currently over 100,000 population in the region today, that are taking on more than 2/3 of the growth in the plan. Those are the places where most of the people in this region live today. There's kind of a storyline that says, well, the Bay Area is a bunch of bedroom communities and they shouldn't change very much at all. There are a number of bedroom communities in the region, clearly, and there's very little growth in this plan directed toward those communities. I mean, honestly, I think on some level it was sort of baffling to the regional agencies when there was so little growth going to many of the communities in Marin and some of the other communities we heard from to a great degree, that there was this kind of pushback. And
right.
I think it's in part a fear of change.
Yeah.
But in fact, the plan doesn't call for much change. It's very much focused on the kinds of projects, as Stuart mentioned, the cities that are really taking on growth. And it's not to say that in San Francisco, for example, there aren't arguments about that growth. But San Francisco is growing in a big way. Even Berkeley is growing. And those arguments are based on something real. So it's interesting.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I mean, because I was at a lot of those hearings, heard a lot of those comments. I think this is clearly a case where the reality of what you're doing is different from the perception of what you're doing. And, if you think about Plan Bay Area, the whole underlying idea was that let's look at how we have future growth in the Bay Area be in areas where there's going to be less vehicle miles traveled, and there's going to be, and therefore that results in lower lower greenhouse gas emissions. And it's important to note, and Ken and I were talking about this up here, that there's a lot of short-term benefits to this plan. It's not just about reducing carbon emissions. It's about improving health in communities, improving air quality in communities, walkability, more transit. So it has a lot of other short-term benefits. And I think what happened is a lot of people believed that a regional agency was telling local jurisdictions what to do. But in fact, every one of those priority development areas that ABAG and MTC approved were initiated by a local city or county that wanted to have more intense development in that area. And these all are local elected officials listening from to their communities and making a decision and accountable to their voters. So there was this perception that these, quote, unelected folks at the regional level were telling, a city in Marin what to do. So I think, and then, as Ken says, it was a fear of change. I mean, if people believe, there's going to be a lot of change, I don't know what that change is going to look like. So it's incumbent on us, I think, at the regional level, and all of us in our communities to really educate people about what this really means. And you can play a large role in that. And just getting back, all of these were sort of initiated at the local city or county level and said, look, we're willing to see more development that's good quality in particular areas.
Thanks. Next item is probably back to Ken here. One Bay Area grants. What size of grants? Who sets the grants? Who pays for what gets planned actually getting built?
So it's really a block grant. They're not individual grants that are going out one by one from MTC. The formula is set up so that each of the counties in the region, through the county transportation agency, which are called congestion management agencies, we call them CMAs around here, they receive an amount of money that they can then utilize for a range of projects. The big idea was that, sort of picking up on what John was just describing, that the resources coming out of the plan should be tied to where growth is happening and where communities are taking on growth willingly. We should be rewarding jurisdictions that aren't saying no and that are saying yes. That's part of what it's about. Another component is that we should really be leveraging what had been siloed money in the past. So each of these county agencies was asked to develop what we called a priority development area growth and investment strategy, where they looked at those areas within their county and said, okay, in the near term, these are the places that should receive investment because they're most ready to really benefit from that investment. In the slightly longer term, these are the areas that should receive investment. And part of it was trying to get beyond what we used to see in the past, which is with all the different pots of money that local communities were pulling from, they might pave a street one year, or rip it up 3 years later to put in a new sewer, and build an apartment project near the BART station that didn't have any amenities around it. And we thought, wouldn't it make more sense to plan that out and really build a neighborhood as a neighborhood and try to tier the investments in a way that made the money go further. So that's the basic idea. This is largely surface transportation money. In total was about $320 million. It's going to go out another 2 years, and then we'll be looking again at how to update the program and what, if any, changes there will be and how much money we'll have to distribute.
Thank you. Did you want to comment? No. Okay. All right. So the next question would be for Supervisor Gioia. There has been discussion about putting more teeth into AB 32. What, if anything, is the Air Quality District and the other air pollution regulators doing to add air monitors, of which there are a few? What are you doing regarding stationary sources?
AB 32, right, is the statewide law on climate change. And as I said in my comments earlier, the legislature, and I see Rich Gordon here, great leader in the legislature from the Bay Area. And Bob Wachowski's here too. I didn't see Bob, but he's here. Who, it's going to be their task, right, to look at how the 2020 goal gets extended past 2020. And the Air Resources Board is going to be making some recommendations about how do you set a midterm 2030 target. And ultimately, it's going to be up to the legislature and the governor to approve that, because that's what's going to give the ability to try to work toward the 2050 goals. Right now, under the law, the Air Resources Board has the ability to maintain the 2020 targets beyond 2020, because with population growth, growth in industry, there will still be a need to keep to the 2020 goals. But the legislature and the governor will then have to extend that. In terms of the local work, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District has the ability to regulate air pollution from stationary sources. So we are working right now for adoption in March or April on a Bay Area refinery emissions rule that would do several things. And it would require greater monitoring of air quality around all 5 Bay Area refineries, and the language for that rule has already been developed. There's already some of that monitoring in place in Richmond around the Chevron refinery through an agreement between the city of Richmond and Chevron, but this rule will have this on a Bay Area-wide basis. The refineries will pay for that additional monitoring, fence line monitoring, more community monitoring, so it will go beyond the monitoring that currently exists, which I think is really important. Second, it will also require a much stronger inventory of tracking emissions at all refineries, and set a limit and say refinery emissions, assuming this is adopted, so this is where your help is needed to continue to support this at the regional level, that it would say that refinery emissions could not go above where they are. And complementary to that, we approved a plan to reduce refinery emissions by approximately 20% by 2020. All of that's currently going on. It's going to go on through 2015. And I know some of you have come to some of those meetings, but your continued involvement and advocacy is going to be really important to following through on that. Now, the good news is refinery emissions have gone down a lot over the last 20 to 30 years over the hard work of the Air District rules, and the new rules at the federal level, predominantly the local level. But we need to have continuous improvement to decrease emissions and improve air quality, and that's ongoing.
I might add that all these meetings are available on webcast now, or on rerun, even on the ABAC site where they don't actually have the audio. The videos are available on the website, so if you are interested, it's very easy to find information. Just a side question, it was mentioned about the congestion management agencies. How many people know your congestion management agency in your county? Okay. So those also are key decision points for the allocation of funds and decision making within each county. So we lead people like to know our governmental jurisdictions almost obsessively, but I would encourage you to pay attention to what's happening in your county, because that does affect how the money is allocated locally. Okay, next question for Stuart and possibly Ken. When planning for bus rapid transit with dedicated lanes, how do we address land use in various jurisdictions along the route with differing support and roadway conditions?
So bus rapid transit, which we've been advocating for since 2002, is potentially disruptive if not done right to the local community, because it often means if you take a dedicated lane for the bus, like along International Boulevard or in East San Jose, like they're going to start very soon, there can be a loss of parking, as well as more traffic if not planned well on the vehicle side. So it's really critical to get the local planning and the land use right, and MTC has funded some work, and we've done some work to make sure a few things happen. First of all, it's a huge opportunity as you're restructuring the street to make a much more walkable and bike-friendly environment. And for those of you who know International Boulevard, it's a pedestrian death zone. And so that's been a major part of the planning, and so that we could actually get people who now drive because they're scared, including to get to or from the transit, to have a much better environment with those kind of investments. We're also hoping to get people on that first and last mile to the transit more easily. So one of the grants that Ken just mentioned, they had a car sharing grant program. We applied in partnership with the City of Oakland to roll out kind of this intensive car sharing and bike sharing education and enrollment program along East Oakland, because low-income communities have been almost systematically shut out of the benefits of car sharing because you need a critical mass of users to effectively place car share, and except for city car share, they are market-driven. And so MTC is going to be supporting us to build that market in East Oakland. So anyway, by the time Bus Rapid Transit opens, we're going to have a smarter land use plan with good densities and great walk-bike environment, and many more people, not just with the BRT option, but with a range of transportation choices to get out of their vehicles, whether they're going to work there or they live there. And that's the way you do it. There's kind of, like everything, there's no silver bullet in this. But where you're going to have that kind of disruption that we love BRT, but it will bring, we have to have a commensurate amount of energy to get great planning and new programs in there to reduce vehicle trips.
Yes, just to follow up on that, perhaps Supervisor Gioia, how about extending commuter benefit programs to local business districts where employers don't have 50 full-time employees, or anything else to advocate the role of carpooling and alternatives?
Thought. I mean, the Air District, working with MTC, developed this program based on legislation, and so I mean, we can always look in the future as this program, as it's rolled out and as it's implemented, to look at how it can be improved going forward. I think we always want to do that. I know the idea was trying to originally not have smaller employers face more of a burden. There was resistance around the Bay Area from a number of small businesses, but the idea of how do you pool employers makes a lot of sense, and I think it's always good to evaluate these programs once they're implemented and look at how we can continue to make them more effective, and especially if you look at business parks where you have employers all, in one area, and it makes sense to, it's more cost effective for everybody to pool them.
This question is regarding the SB 375 targets. Says a major flaw in SB 375's implementation was allowing the Metropolitan Planning Organizations to use a per capita process to set their targets. This has led to artificially low greenhouse gas reduction targets that will essentially be wiped out by population growth. The per capita formula was not in SB 375. How was guidance given by the ARB? How can this flaw be addressed?
And I was on the RTAC, if you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I was appointed by ARB to serve on the committee that developed the methodology for the targets, and so that was one of the earliest and biggest debates. Is this an absolute number that we're talking about? The region has to reduce absolute amounts of driving. Really from, it's really, while it's GHGs from cars and light trucks, it's really kind of the amount of driving, less on the kind of vehicle efficiency side. And the reason we went for a per capita, I think, was very smart, is that there was a tremendous growth differential between regions, with some barely growing and some growing very quickly, especially the Central Valley. And in some ways, it would have felt like an absolute amount would have likely ended up giving some of the regions a buy, while putting too much of a burden on the other one. So it kind of was an equalizer that allowed you to look clearly, without that differential in growth, whether a region is doing a lot. And so essentially that wouldn't skew it. The bigger question isn't, was it per capita or is it absolute? The bigger and more important question is, how aggressive is it? No matter what kind of ratio and denominators you're using. And that was something that was limited by the power of SB 375. SB 375, for those that know it, it's a planning framework that basically gives the regional, the most powerful thing is that there's smarter planning at the regional level. A less powerful thing is there are some incentives for cities to plan for housing, and then some environmental relief at the very local level that's very hard to use. So SB 375 is a great framework law, but because it didn't give new funding or really any strong new regulatory powers over land use, we had to set the targets at a modest amount, at a modest level, so that they can be met. And kind of the catch-22 was, if we set targets that were too aggressive and regions really couldn't meet, they essentially had this out that they could easily choose of just creating this alternative plan. And so the kind of regional plan wouldn't kind of hold as much power. And so that was the dilemma we were at. But getting back to the kind of point of the question about per capita, I still think it was the right way to go, and so that we could kind of clearly compare regions to each other. And the bigger issue is, like, how do we overcome the weaknesses of SB 375, which is both money and sometimes, some other regulatory issues.
And if I can, I think Stuart's points are really accurate. And I think it's important to note, the Bay Area, I've seen a lot of these plans presented from around the state at the Air Resources Board. The Bay Area plan is really one of the most aggressive plans in the state. It's been tougher getting improvement in the Central Valley because of the development patterns there. And remember, the SCS, which is going to take a long time to see the impacts of those, positive impacts, only contribute 5% toward meeting the 2020 goal of greenhouse gas reduction back to the 1990 levels. Now it'll achieve a larger percentage of the goal toward 2030 or 2050 as build out occurs. But it's important to note, I think Stuart really raised, it's really about getting communities to plan healthier and achieve other co-benefits in addition to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So I think, I think it's done that in the Bay Area. I think it's really laid out, and it's also doing it in a way, doing it in a way that gets the public to go along. Remember, these land use decisions are made not at the state level, they're made at the city and county level. So there's a balance about how you achieve the statewide goals, but how you listen to local communities about how you do your planning. And so there's a fine balance.
I'll just really quickly, just 2 points. One is, I think, and I'm not sure everyone in the room knows this or if it's been said, but SB 375, the regional plans account for emissions related to automobiles and light trucks. That's essentially how we all drive. As Supervisor said earlier, there are a number of benefits to the plan, including climate benefits that could be attributed to the plan that we don't take credit for or can't under the law. It was designed that way, and that's probably okay. But if you think about more growth occurring in places that are walkable, served by transit, areas that don't require as much per capita water use, don't require, because we have this sometimes too wonderful Mediterranean climate here near the Bay, don't require the same kind of heating and cooling that a home in the Central Valley would require if somebody's commuting from there. There are lots and lots of co-benefits that I think the growth pattern can provide, and they aren't all captured in that target. The other, and it picks up on some of what Stuart was talking about, is I think of our friend and partner from the Sacramento region, Mike McKeever, as he often uses a phrase about breaking a sweat. Like, we needed to break a sweat. This needed to be hard. I think we all feel like we broke a sweat. But it needed to be attainable. If you try to do something that just from the get-go, there is no way to get from point A to point B, it collapses. And I think that CARB and the state came up with a good structure through the RTAC process of putting something out there that was aggressive that we had to really work toward. And now I think it would be helpful if much more of the energy was focused on how do you get communities to yes. And if they're not getting the yes, have a rational discussion about why, then focusing on where you're setting a per capita target versus an absolute target, which is a interesting conversation in a room like this, but I don't think it does much on the ground. So.
Thank you. We, of course, have lots and lots of questions. The one I have, just to close this panel out, is it sounds as if there are any number of different agencies that have responsibility for meeting the goals, the legal goals, the political goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. How do each of these agencies know that they're doing their share and that we're achieving the overall target?
I actually raised a sort of a form of that question at our Air Resources Board meeting this week, and that's that as the cap and trade budget flows out into communities and through state agencies, how are we measuring that work to ensure that the money is being invested in ways that achieve the maximum GHG reductions with co-benefits? As has been mentioned, we need to address the co-benefits, and at least 25% of the revenues must be spent in disadvantaged communities, which also improve air quality and achieve many other really good goals. And so we've had discussion at the Air Resources Board to ensure that each of the state agencies that are dispersing cap and trade revenue, and some of it goes to local communities, some goes to other state agencies, is that we're ensuring that all the results of these projects are measured. For example, I think it's 120 million, 130 million there's a pot of money that is right now out for proposals to implement things like Plan Bay Area, the SCS strategy. It's the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities pot of money that is being distributed through what's called the Strategic Growth Council to local communities, and cities and counties get to apply for that. So that's out there now. And we're going to want to look at measuring all of these to ensure that we're getting maximum GHGs with other co-benefits. So I think there's a lot of discussion occurring at the state level about that. And then I just need to add one item. There's been a lot of discussion in the Bay Area, at the Bay Area Quality Management District, through organizations like Climate 350, the League, and others, about what is the Bay Area doing. And let me just say, most of the climate action plans, actually, in many of the cities here in the Bay Area and counties, were partially funded by grants from the Air District, and those have formed the basis of a lot of local action, which is going to continue. And so all these levels are complementary to each other.
Yes, anyone else wish?
I just want to say one thing, which is AB 32 has turned out to be this incredibly powerful law, certainly more powerful than I thought it was going to be when it was passed. And I would just encourage that the most important thing possibly that happens this year is that AB 32 is extended while we have so many factors going into place. NRDC and Annie had played a major role in the first round, and I think we'll be taking up a lot of the lead again from the advocacy standpoint. And I just encourage everybody from that.
Right.
It forces the air districts, it forces MTC, it forces everybody to take more action on climate protection.
He is absolutely right. I think that's really a takeaway message from this, because we're all talking about this goal of 2050 of 80% below 1990. Remember what I said? That is in an executive order, one by Governor Schwarzenegger and one by Governor Brown. Until the legislature and the governor approve and extend AB 32 beyond 2020, we don't have a legislative target.
Thank you all very much.